In Pennsylvania yesterday, Trump renewed his false claims about the election being rigged and mused about violence against journalists.
And I have this piece of glass here, but all we have really over here is the fake news, right? And to get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. And I don't mind that so much, because I don't mind.
Kamala Harris will spend the final day of her campaign in Pennsylvania. The state's 19 electoral college votes could play a pivotal role in determining the results. Harris will be joined by Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, and Oprah at today's rallies.
In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it?
Roughly 77 million Americans have already voted in early voting. And remember, the election is largely going to be decided across 7 states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. With me now is Eric Ham. He's CTV's political analyst. Eric, hello to you. Good to see you. We've talked a lot about the polls, and I want to begin this morning by asking you what the buzz is about following this poll that came out in Iowa that shows Harris with a pretty strong lead ahead of Donald Trump. This is raising a lot of eyebrows, a lot of questions, both sides, viewing this in a very different way. Republicans getting quite upset. What's the big deal with this poll in Iowa?
Well, the big is a ruby red state, and it's a state that has traditionally gone Republican. And now we see at the 11th hour, it appears as though voters, particularly women over the age of 65 in Iowa, are now moving late breaking towards Kamala Harris. So what it begs the question now is, if Iowa is somehow going blue for Kamala Harris, what does that mean for other Midwestern states as well, including states like Ohio, where you have a consequential Senate race taking place there? Now, when you actually look at the numbers in Iowa, the early vote numbers, what we have seen is that it's a virtual dead tie in the state between Republicans and Democrats who have already voted, which suggests that this poll does suggest that something is actually going on in Iowa. Will Kamala Harris win? We don't know. But the fact that she's competitive there says a lot about where this race is. And then we also have seen a recent poll that shows Donald Trump is only ahead in Kansas by 5 points. And so, again, what we're seeing here is it looks like there's a lot of late breaking moves for voters that are actually going in the way of Kamala Harris right now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Harris has spent hardly any time in Iowa.
Absolutely. Harris has not been to, again, these are traditional red states. So states like Iowa, Kansas, or even Texas, we don't see Democrats really making the investment at the top of the ticket in those states. So if there's something going on, and I think what we're seeing here is that there has been, I think, perhaps an underestimation of the women vote and just how engaged they are, particularly around this issue of women's reproductive health.
What do you make of the way both candidates are spending the final few hours of this campaign and where they're deciding to spend their time? Let's start with Donald Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump, again, continues to, I just think, create so much uproar, so much controversy. And I think if Donald Trump actually loses this race, this will be a race that he lost in the last week of the race. If you start with that rally at Madison Square Garden, going all the way to yesterday saying he shouldn't have left the White House, and now is somehow suggesting that journalists be killed, I think what we're continuing to see is Donald Trump's very dark, very violent rhetoric that could turn off a lot of people, especially those middle-aged white women who are in suburbs that Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, you would think, would be aggressively courting. But it seems like Donald Trump at this point just doesn't care.
Okay, and what about Harris? Yet again, she's pulling out the big gun. She's got Oprah with her today, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry.
Yeah, Katy Perry, that's actually a head scratcher right there. I always thought Katy Perry was a Republican. Maybe she's just one of those Republicans who have actually come over to the other side. But also, we saw Kamala Harris in Michigan yesterday. And again, if you're looking at the early vote, in the last few days, we have seen that race really begin to tighten as a result of the early vote. And I think what it says is, and what it shows is, that the lack of outreach by the Harris campaign to the Arab American vote, to the Arab American population, has, I think, been a bit of an issue for them. We'll still have to see how that state plays out. But when you look at just how aggressive the Harris campaign has been connecting with every single demographic in this election, but simply refusing or just ignoring outright the Arab American population, I think that is something that they should be concerned about.
All right. And I have to ask you as well the question that I'm sure you've probably already been asked a gazillion times and will be asked a gazillion more before tomorrow. And that is, when will we start to know some real results? When might Pennsylvania's numbers come in?
Oh, gosh.
It's when. I'm not asking you who. I'm not asking you who, Eric. Just when.
Well, I do believe, okay, if we go back to 2020, already we see early voting is down about 23 million votes. So we know there was about 100 million people who voted in early voting in 2020. We're now at 77 million with early voting in this election. And of course, it was a pandemic 4 years ago. And so I still think there's going to be a very, very high turnout on Election Day. And I think that means that the vote count, I think, is going to be very, very slow. Unfortunately, in key battleground states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. Wisconsin, however, I do believe we will start to get some results there. But I think we want to start looking at some of those outlining suburbs around urban areas like Philadelphia and Detroit, because I think we will start to get numbers in those surrounding suburbs and areas around Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia. And I think those will come in much quicker. And I think that will give us an indication of not only the turnout, but where the split is and how the votes are coming down, particularly among those suburban voters. Are they actually jumping over to Kamala Harris, or are they sticking with Donald Trump? I think that will give us an indication. And I think that should start to come in as soon as polls close in those respective states.
And so then, Eric, in terms of that gender divide, which you and I have talked about so much, will we know in the next couple of days if it was, the guys that came out for Trump and the women that came out for Harris that clinched, that made the winner? Or how long will we know, or will we know how the gender divide plays out?
Well, we already know that. That's a good question, because we know that there is a gender divide. We know there's a 10-point gap in the early vote. But we don't know how these women are actually voting. And I think we won't get the answer to that until the votes are actually counted and we're able to glean who actually voted for Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. And then also, too, some of that will start to come through in the exit polls in terms of what people will say after they voted in person starting tomorrow.
Okay, Eric, thanks for all that. We'll talk to you again soon. Appreciate it.